Peace everyone, Unmask here, and today I'm going to share some simple tips to help improve your drawing and coloring. So here are the 4 things that I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about vertical lines, horizontal lines, using triangles, and also silhouettes. This is going to be the first example that I work through, and I'm going to talk about vertical lines, horizontal lines, and triangles, and how they can help improve your drawing immediately with no practice. And of course, with practice, you'll get even better. So imagine that this photograph here is an artwork that you want to paint, or you want to draw, or you want to color. It doesn't matter if you want to replicate this reference photo. But imagine that this is the piece of paper and you want to draw this image onto it or paint this image onto it. The first things that I look for is the horizontal lines that I can use to measure the proportions of how everything fills up space on my canvas or my paper. So the first horizontal line I generally look for, especially in landscapes, is the horizon line. So if I just draw a line through here, this is sort of the horizon line. It's right smack dab in the middle of the paper, and that really helps me sort of balance how much the land takes up of the paper and how much the sky takes up of the paper. And pretty much the land takes up a little over 50%, as you can see the mountains coming over top of the horizon line. But for the most part, you can say the sky is about half and the ground is about half. The next thing that I'll look for is any of like the foreground land. So I can see that the base of the mountains starts a little bit through here. So I can use that horizontal line as a guide. I can see another horizontal line for the foreground grass. And of course, these horizontal lines are just to help measure some of the space that each area takes up of the paper. And as you can see here, the bottom half of the paper is really close to being split into thirds, where you have this third being this mountain right here. You have this third being this grassy plain down here, and then the bottom third being the taller, closer grass. So that's how I use some of the horizontal lines to help measure the proportions that I need to create landscapes or pretty much anything really. Horizontal lines are extremely useful to help measure and gauge how much space you should be putting on your paper. Now let's talk a little bit about vertical lines. Now with this particular landscape, there's not a whole lot of use for vertical lines in the landscape itself. However, we do have an individual standing here, and so what I would like to do is take the widest measurements of the individual. So the first thing I'll do, like this elbow is the farthest thing to the left. So if I imagine a vertical line here, I can see that that vertical line is just slightly off center to the left. And then if I take this one here, I gauge a little bit more of the total width of the individual standing there. And using that, I can help create the proportions. This, with the horizontal and vertical lines, you may be thinking about the grid method. And essentially, this is the evolved version of the grid method. And if you don't know what the grid method is, well, I have good news for you. Because not only on my website do I have a ton of projects for you to do that include all real-time instruction, step by step, for all of these projects, I also have a detailed lesson on the grid method. So even if you don't know the grid method, you can learn it on the Art Club. Okay, so now what do we do with these vertical lines? How can we use the information from our reference and our simple measurements to help us draw it? Well, as I explained with the horizontal lines, that helps create the space necessary in proportion on our canvas or our paper. Well, the vertical lines do the same exact thing, just a different orientation. So like I mentioned, this line here is just slightly left of center. And with the width of the individual standing here, we can see that if I split the other part in half, we can see that the individual is about 1/3. So if we have this first line here being just left of center, then we can sort of eyeball the width of our person by dividing the right side, or what's remaining on the right side of that line, into thirds, and we can get pretty close to the width of the individual. Now, one of the things I want to mention is that I don't personally draw these lines on my artwork. I visualize this instead. So I just think about these horizontal and vertical lines when I'm looking at my reference in order to start drawing. Now, this is something that's going to take a little bit of practice. I've been using the grid method for many, many years, ever since I was about 13 years old, which was 20 years ago. So I've been using the grid method for a very long time. And by using that and then incorporating into this what I call scaffolding, using the horizontal and vertical lines, I can do this just visualizing the lines as opposed to drawing them out. Now, the next step that I want to talk about is actually drawing the person, because really the landscape here is rather simple, and it's just the person standing there that is really the most complex element. And the last measurement that I would take is, of course, where the person stops in height. So we have the width, and now we just have to figure out the height. And the height, it's going to be a little bit trickier, but you can use the relationship of the height with other things in the reference. So for instance, we can see that the mountain here is a little bit higher, it's a little bit taller. And so I'd say this is about 1/4 of the way up. Remember, this horizontal line here was about halfway of the page. And if we just divide this into quarters, roughly, we can see it's a little less than 1/4. You use those measurements to help eyeball where the height stops. You'll get better at it with time. It just takes a little bit of practice, and it takes thinking like this in order to get better at it. The other shape that I haven't talked about yet is triangles. Now, how do I do triangles? Well, actually, before I get to triangles, what I want to talk about is the silhouette. So if we have a silhouette, because that's the way that I think of different separate objects in each scene or each reference that I'm replicating, I think about the space the entire thing takes up. Because if you look at this person with the jacket and the hat and the hair, the book bag, everything, all of the elements all in one, it can feel a little overwhelming because it's rather complex. There's a lot of different textures, there's a lot of different shapes, and it can feel like something that's really difficult to draw. But instead, if you think of it just like a silhouette, there's no detail, there's just the shape of it, the outer shape. That's what you want to focus on first. And by doing that, you can see, since we've put our object into a box, we can then use triangles to help approximate the drawing of it. So this is how I use triangles. Now that we are thinking about the object in a silhouette, and I'm just going to leave the silhouette up there, we're going to start drawing triangles. Now, we already have two sides of our triangles. We have the horizontal lines, we have the vertical lines. Now we just need to add the diagonal lines to help us draw a bit more accurately. So what I look for when creating my triangles is I look for the broadest shaped triangles I can. And the best way to do that is look for the tangents where the object is hitting the line. We drew the top line hitting the very top of the hat. We drew this line hitting the sleeve, kind of the elbow, over here and over here. So these are our tangents. And the diagonal lines for our triangles are going to come over these tangents. And this is where we're going to get our triangles. Now that we have these triangles. And the triangles that I'm talking about are, of course, these triangles here. If you are able to measure the height and also measure where these tangents are, where the elbow's sort of the widest part, and you connect these triangles, you can start to see the shapes that lie on either side. So we have this shape here, this shape, and just a little bit of the hat, just a little sliver of the hat. Those shapes are not difficult to draw. I don't think anybody would argue that this little bumps off the side of this line are complex or difficult to draw. And it's because we simplified our complex person that's standing there. First, we think about it as a silhouette. We box it in with horizontal and vertical lines, and then we triangulate the most broadest shapes in order to create very simple lines that are going to give us the shape of our silhouette. And if you can draw the silhouette of an object accurately, you'll find that whatever's inside the silhouette is that much easier to draw as well. And that is how I use the idea of silhouettes, horizontal, vertical lines, and triangles to help me draw not just more effectively, but more efficiently as well. The more you practice this method and this sort of mindset of thinking of how you draw things, you're going to get faster and faster and faster at drawing. And the other thing that I wanted to mention about silhouettes is that you can treat each object, especially landscapes, as its own individual silhouette. Once you get the shape of the silhouette, you can use those same horizontal and vertical lines to develop the silhouette of the foreground, the middle ground, and of course the background. And you can see how these simple silhouette shapes allow you to quickly make sort of depth in your landscapes or whatever type of art you're doing. It doesn't have to be landscapes. As far as illustrating the point of this and the usefulness of it, landscapes are really easy. As you can see, we still create quite a bit of the scene, the original scene, just by using silhouettes. And by isolating each individual element in its own little silhouette, you can see how simplified something as detailed as this can become. And it makes it that much easier to paint it, that much easier to color it. All of that just becomes much, much easier. And you want to start thinking about your references in this way as you start coloring them, as you start drawing them, and as you start painting them, because it's just going to make your life so much easier. Now I'm going to finish up with one more example here, and I'm just talk a little bit about symmetry, and I'm going to show you how I use horizontal and vertical lines in a subject matter like this, a still life project. So pretty much as far away from a landscape as I can get is a still life. So here we go. So first, I always use the horizontal lines to help me make measurements proportional of the largest shapes. Okay, so the entire project is kind of cut into thirds. If I erase this last line, you have 1/3 here, and then a second third here, and then the third third here. So you can divide your paper up into relative thirds. It's a little wider on top, so you can make those adjustments rather easily. And then that's going to give you a ton of information just by having those lines laid out on your paper. We can use the vertical lines again to create the width of our decorative bowl chalice thing that's holding the lemons. I'm not sure what to call this, but we can see that this line here is pretty much right in half. It's splitting the paper right in half. So now we have the thirds split horizontally, we have the paper split right in half vertically, and we can see that maybe if we add a center line here. So let's just do a center of the chalice thing, because that would be the center, right? The width split in half is the center of our chalice, which, as you can see from the chalice, it's symmetrical. So if you can get the symmetry lines, the vertical lines that create the symmetry of this object, it just makes it that much easier to draw, because now you only have to worry about one side being accurate, and then you just have to mirror it over. It's relatively easy. And also, what you can see now that I've drawn that center line is this is 1/3, this is 1/3, and this is 1/3. So we split the paper in thirds horizontally, and now we split this little section of the paper in thirds vertically. And our chalice fits perfectly in these two 1/3 areas. So 2/3 of this little section of the paper, the chalice takes up in its width. And now we have the center line. And now we can use this bottom third line sort of rough in the estimate of where the bottom part of the chalice is, the thinnest part of the chalice. So we can put like, okay, here's the thinnest part of this chalice. And then we can use these lines to create triangles. And now we just have to worry about these little shapes here for the edge of the chalice along our triangle edge. And that line is far easier to create now. These lines are a lot easier to create because we just did a couple very easy measurements. All right, that is all I have for you today. I hope that you found this video helpful. If you did, make sure you give it a thumbs up for me and check out the art club. I have links for that in the description. I hope to see you over there soon. Also, don't miss out on the live streams. I live stream every Monday and Tuesday. I also do live critiques the first Friday of every month. I'm doing one this coming Friday after this video is released. So if you want to participate in that, make sure you join the Facebook group and the Discord, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Peace.